Welcome back. Well, it may be good to be rich, but it may not necessarily be bad being poor, at least in America.
Our next guest says the standards are shifting, and poverty in the U.S. is not a description of hardship necessarily, just a comparison of what you have versus your neighbor. Robert Rector is a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, helped write the welfare reform laws back in the 90s. Good to see you, sir.
Morning, Robert.
Good morning.
How has the definition of poverty in America changed?
Well, the Obama administration is now changing the definition of poverty so that a family of four with full health insurance in New York City can be poor with an income of $39,000. In Oakland, it's around $43,000. But the reality is that for years there's been a huge gap between what the average American thinks about when he hears the word poverty and even the old way that the government defined it. When you see the mainstream media running a story on poverty saying there are 49 million poor people, they'll feature a homeless family, but only about 2% of the poor are homeless. In fact, the average poor American lives in a house or apartment that's larger than the average non-poor Frenchman, German, or Englishman. 80% of poor Americans under the old definition had air conditioning, 2/3 cable TV, half of them have a computer, a third of them have a widescreen HD TV, a quarter of them have a TiVo. If you ask them, was anyone in your family hungry for even a single day during the last year, the overwhelming majority will say no. They have access to medical care. They have no hardship whatsoever. There's a complete disconnect between the way the government defines poverty and the way the American people think about it and the way the media presents it.
Why does this matter? When we shift this definition, how does this affect the average American, especially as we're having these fiscal cliff discussions in Washington, is figuring out who's getting tax breaks, cutting loopholes, and so forth?
Well, the reality is that we spend close to $1 trillion a year on assistance to the poor, cash, food, housing, medical care that does not include Social Security and Medicare. That's about $9,000 for each recipient. 100 million people receive this aid. It's a huge amount of spending, and it's ridiculous to pretend that we can spend all that money and still have kids that don't have food to eat all over the country. This is really an advertising tool, the poverty measure, an advertising tool for expanding the welfare state and for spreading the wealth by pretending that there's a massive amount of hardship that really doesn't occur anymore in our society.
Perhaps not getting the resources to those who truly need it the most. Robert Rector, Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, thank you for being on this morning.
Thank you.